Hello and welcome to a new edition of True Audio Files. Today, as you've seen in the not comments, but in the title, I will be doing a sound quality shootout for Eagles The Long Run. But before I get into that, this week was a really big week for releases. There were some that I skipped, but just because of the cost factor, and I've already have good copies of them. But the ones I did get, for example, are two of these ones are big ones for me. The Atlantic 75th anniversary audiophile releases done by Analog Productions. We've got Stone Temple Pilots Core, and we've got Giant Steps by John Coltrane. Both 45 RPM, cut from the Analog Master tapes, and looking forward to checking both of those out. I have a couple of good copies of Giant Steps. I have a recent remaster of Core, but I don't have an early pressing. But we'll have to see how it compares. I know there is a music on vinyl version, which I've heard is pretty good. But I don't know. I have a version of Purple from Music on Vinyl, and I was not very happy with it, and the original pressing, which I do have, blew it away. So regardless, that's part of the reason why I don't have the Music on Vinyl version of Core. So, also, Casey Musgrave's new album came out this week. We've got Donald Byrd's Classic Vinyl Series reissue here. There's also the Miles Davis, I think it was Volume 1, I think it was, or Volume 2, I can't remember. It was Volume 1 or 2 on Classic Vinyl reissue as well, but I already have a really great copy of that, so I skipped out on that. And then the new Black Crowes album, too. The other one that I skipped out on, there's a couple that I skipped out on, but the other big one for me is actually one of my favorite albums of all times, and that's John Coltrane's My Favorite Things, which is available as a 75th anniversary reissue. It's the stereo version, which I'm not as big of a fan of, and I already have a good version of the stereo 45 as a stereo 45 RPM anyways. Bernie Grundman, I think, and Chris Bellman cut it a few years back for ORG, and I also have another stereo copy, and I have a decent mono copy that are both really good quality reissues too. So I kind of skipped out on that one also. So, but another one I did not skip out on this week was the one I'm going to be doing the sound quality shootout for, and that is the Eagles Long Run. And I have the Mobile Fidelity One Step, cut from a DSD copy of the master tapes. I was kind of excited. I know it doesn't make that much of a difference, but I got number 139 out of the group, so I was pretty stoked to get that. So got the One Step, as you see here, and they have it on the old boxes. As if any of you know, One Step has kind of changed their process now, where they have a thinner box and it's more streamlined, which I really appreciate. But pretty sure they did this to kind of make it look the same as all the other Eagles reissues that they did. And this is the last one I believe they're going to be doing. So they kind of wanted to make them all look the same. I will be doing a shootout with this one against a early, I'm not sure if it's exactly a first, but it's an early Sterling cut from back in, I think this is like a 79. I really didn't do a lot of research, but I know it's one of the early, if not first pressings. And yes, you saw that right. I actually have a Goodwill sticker on it that I paid $1 for this for, probably, I don't know, 5 or 6, probably, maybe even closer to 10 years ago. But anyways, and so those are the two record versions I'm going to be comparing it to. I also decided to try the MoFi SACD, which I don't have on me, but I wanted to try to hear what it sounded like in comparison to these two as well. So, as some of you may know how I normally do these things, I will repeat it anyway. As I listen to the newest release or reissue that I'm usually comparing to, and listen to that all the way through. Try to figure out what tracks are going to be the best tracks to listen to, and then do an A/B comparison between those tracks. And in this one, I chose two of the more popular ones. I did The Long Run and Heartache Tonight. Mostly Heartache Tonight, but I did do The Long Run a little bit too. So anyways, I put the One Step on. I thought it sounded really good. nice deep soundstage, nice kind of 3D feel to the recording. Good depth to the soundstage, good detail. I thought the detail was great. Really good deep bass, and definitely plenty of highs. I think some people might think that it has a little bit too much in the high end, but because one thing that I did notice right away on it, and is that there was so much high end that you actually could hear the tape hiss from the original master tapes. So that was kind of a disappointment in that sense. But I think overall it sounded great. It was smooth, obviously super quiet vinyl. And overall, I thought it was a great experience, and I thought they did a good job. So again, I decided to do Heartache Tonight and The Long Run. I mainly focused on Heartache Tonight, and I A-B'd back and forth quite a bit on these. And I have to say, honestly, the EQ on the original early pressing, I thought actually was better. There was a little bit more mid-range, but not too much, and not as much treble. I thought, I think maybe if there was somewhere in between on the treble where it maybe is a little bit less than on the one step, but a little bit more than there was on the early pressing, and then you had the bass from the one step, you probably would have had the perfect EQ on these. But overall, if I had to, and as a personal preference, and I want to stress that, personal preference, I have to say from an EQ standpoint, the early pressing definitely had the better EQ in my personal opinion, even though it didn't have quite as much bass as I like typically. Or I should say, it didn't have as much bass as the one step, and I'm usually a big bass guy. I think overall that sounded more natural to me. It definitely didn't, the early pressing definitely didn't have the detail and the quite as nice of a sound stage. I mean, you could easily, or I should say, you could better place the instruments on the sound stage on the one step more so than you could on the early pressing. But it was pretty close. I mean, you really had to, I A-B'd quite a bit of times back and forth before I really could make that full determination. When I first listened to the early pressing, I kind of thought it was flat and not quite as good as a sound from a soundstage perspective. Pardon me. But the more I listened and went back and forth, the more I realized it was pretty close. But there was definitely still an edge with the one step. So, the one step was very good. And if you don't have, if soundstage and that more 3D feel and the more detail is something that is more important to you than the EQ, or more importantly, if you feel the earlier pressings have too much mid-range or maybe not quite enough treble and bass, then the one step's probably going to be for you. Now, like I had said, also I did go back and test the SACD MoFi SACD, and it's quite a bit different sounding than the one step, which was a little bit of a surprise to me. I know that they master them differently often, but this one was a pretty obvious difference. I mean, the sound stage and the 3D detail was still pretty good, although didn't seem quite as much, but still a little bit more than the early pressing. But what I did find, there was actually a lot more mid-range in the MoFi, the SACD. Matter of fact, I think there was probably a little too much mid-range. So I think it had probably pretty similar bass, but the mid bass mainly, like the lower mid range, was definitely, for lack of a better word, bloated on these SACD. So I think if they calmed that down a little bit, even if they just calmed that down a little bit and left the treble and bass the way it was, I think it would have been significantly better. But in my opinion, if they could have maybe bumped the treble a hair more and lower that mid-range a little bit, that would have been a perfect EQ. I think the perfect EQ, like I said, kind of lies between the three different versions that I tested here. So the one thing I should have done now that I think about it is I do have a reissue, high-resolution reissue from about 10 years ago, I think, and I should have tried that one, but I didn't listen to that one, so probably should have. But anyways, because this one's primarily about records, and I would say, like I said, if you got an early pressing, or you can find one, because you're certainly going to be able to find one for less than the one step, even in perfect condition. That would probably be my go-to. Um, I guess it all depends on, how, if you're sitting listening to the music and you're really trying to pay close attention to the recording and really get a sense for being in that room, the one step's definitely going to get you closer from a sound stage and imaging perspective and detail perspective. But the EQ is going to be more natural on the early pressing. So that is my take on Eagles the long run. Do you have the one step? And what do you have that, if you do, what do you have that you've compared it to? And what are your thoughts? What do you think about the one step, and even maybe the MoFi SACD if you have it? So I'd love to hear your take on that and know what your thoughts are. My thoughts are, for not all that much money, you can buy a really good copy of an early first pressing of this album. I'm sure you're not going to be able to get it for $1 like I did, but I'm guessing it's probably still not going to be, I don't have no idea, but I'm guessing it's not going to be more than $20 or $30, and it's certainly not going to be the cost of the one step. So I think that you'll be super happy with that as opposed to the one step. One step will be good for a collectible, and definitely good if you're really more focused on getting that in the room feel from a soundstage and detail perspective, though. So if you don't mind the tape hiss. All right, so that is everything I've got for today. I want to thank you for subscribing if you subscribe. If you don't, please do so. I would love to get all the new subscribers I can. Hit that like button if you liked this video, and and if you hit that alert bell, it'll let you know when my new videos come out. And please make some comments in the comments section. Love to hear your thoughts on this, and let me know how I'm doing too. So that's everything for this episode. I want to thank you very much, and you have a great rest of the day and great rest of your week.